Welcome to the Wicked Podcast, where we read the business books you don't have the time for. I'm Marcus Kirsch.
And I'm Troy Norcross.
And we are your co-hosts for the Wicked Podcast. Hello and welcome to the Wicked Podcast. Yes, I'm still in Iceland, and today I'm talking to Cate Murden, the CEO of Push, Mind and Body. We talked a lot about mental health in organizations, how to detect it, how to start, how can leadership be more aware of it, and how generally create a better culture around mental health of employees and people in general, and how to create a better organization that tackles this current pandemic that is often very hidden. I hope you enjoy. Before the interview, a quick word from our very first sponsor, Zencaster. We use Zencaster for all our audio and video recording, and it's a very nifty tool that splits up all the channels for very easy editing. Zencaster is used by 10% of all active podcasts. You can get 40% off the first 3 months and unlimited audio and video recordings with our special coupon code WICKEDPODCAST. I repeat, Wicked Podcast for 40% off. And now the interview. Hello everyone and welcome to the Wicked Podcast. Today we're here with Cate Murden. Hey Cate, and thank you for joining us.
You're very welcome. It's a pleasure.
As usual, we start from the top. So please tell us who you are and what you do.
Of course. So I am Cate and I am the founder and CEO of Push. And Push, we say, is a training and coaching business whose objective is to make work better. So we combine mental health programs, well-being, personal and professional development, and then finally what leadership. So everything that's really going to focus on the individuals within companies to look at how we can improve their performance and that of the business as well, because we think, at the moment we're going through quite a lot of challenge, having everything that we've been through and the rate of change that we're going to keep going. And never before have we kind of really need to tap into our kind of human skills and look at how we improve those. And that's everything that Push is about.
Yeah. So I can imagine you got your hands full, and not just because of COVID, but probably exactly as you just mentioned, especially in particular in the UK, but it seems to be a global thing. The economic situation is not better. I've just been in a project as well where towards the end of the year, there was a lot of re-budgeting and rejigging of a lot of things, including affecting a lot of people just before Christmas. Tell me a little bit more about, how you see, let's say, if you look at 3 different places and how they relate to each other. So pre-COVID, what already existed, a potential issue on that level. COVID would likely made a lot of things worse in particular level. And then post-COVID economics and that. And how do you see the landscape at the moment through these 3 phases, which might be a long answer, but we're not afraid of long answers here.
Okay, so I think the very simple answer is that there's always going to be something, right? There's always going to be something that we're facing. There is always some kind of we always are living in some kind of uncertainty, I guess. And I suppose on the other side of it, it's then what's expected of people as well. So I personally think, well, if we go back to pre-COVID, for example, we were still very much working within this marketplace, but I guess it was potentially a little bit of a harder sell. Like not every single business was concerned with doing this kind of work. Push forward to COVID, if I'm being really honest with you, Marcus, I genuinely thought that my business was going to go under. I really thought that all of this stuff would genuinely go out the window. But as we all know, this content and this work was the need for it was raised more than ever before, because if one of the small positives of COVID was that actually the stuff that was already there was really brought to the surface, like oil coming up to the surface of water, and people really started talking about it more. Now, post COVID, I genuinely believe that we've been through a trauma, and trauma isn't obviously the event itself. It's what's happened within our brains and our bodies as a result of that event. And we need to keep dealing with that. And then I think actually, so not only have we got people who have been through something deeply traumatic, but then have great expectations still placed upon them, if not more so, but possibly have less capacity and less resilience to be able to do that. So I think, what we need to, and then as well as that, obviously the businesses that they're working in are operating in deeply different ways as well. So we've got a lot of different things to be contending with, which ultimately is all slightly eating away at our day-to-day well-being. But those expectations are still great, if not greater, because of the rate of change of that which is needed within our business to cope with what's going on with the cost of living, for example, or the recessions that we're going through, or the mass redundancies, etc. So it's a lot, and it's a lot on people that have just been through something deeply traumatic as well. So yeah, that would be my slightly short answer.
So, do you think we're somewhere in a kind of a bit of a paradox? Because if you look at so there was pressure before, pressure through COVID. I mean, we saw, kind of extreme areas like the NHS and so on, but a lot of other businesses as well who had to furlough, had to minimize what people could do and how they could
Hmm.
work. And then after that, because of the
Mm,
economic parts, people just were even more let go. So now you have less people doing more, so you have
mhm,
additional pressure
mhm,
to the point where burnouts. And I,
mhm,
read an article earlier today that you published out there where you say, the burnout rates is just getting higher and higher, and more easily people
mm,
do burn out.
mm,
Is that
mm,
then a bit of a paradox that companies want to, and how big is that paradox that companies want to save money to stay afloat, I guess,
mhm,
or safeguard themselves for any more impact by letting people go,
mhm,
but then totally burning out the
mhm.
remaining people to the point where their production goes so down that eventually they're shooting themselves twice. Um, how do you see that? Is there a business case against that classic default solution for going like, oh, we just cut people and then everyone has to work double?
Mm. So I think that I think that's a really simple way of looking at it, right? I think the point is that if we are in these circumstances where ultimately if a business is thriving regardless of the context, they're not going to need to cut costs, right? So I think that the bigger question here is actually as much about how do we improve how a business is working now. So that for me is that's the answer. It's not about whether or not we cut costs, it's actually how do we improve how a business is working, right? Would you agree?
Yeah, definitely. So, and
Yeah.
given that the businesses often have the business buyers in terms of cost, the first thing is, or can we get more efficient? Can we save costs to be more profitable? That's the standard look
Yeah.
at it.
So I think there are, yeah, I think that the question here, in my opinion, is if we are at a time of of less income coming into a business, we need to either look at a way of cutting costs, or we need to look at a way of improving the effectiveness and the efficiencies within the business. So I suppose, well, either the productivity or the effectiveness or the
Mhm.
efficiencies within a business. So if we're looking at improving the efficiencies, then one of the obvious ways is to remove people, right? Because obviously that's going to cut some of our costs, but ultimately that doesn't necessarily make it more efficient. So to the point that you raised, it's like if we are going to do that, if we are going to be removing people, then surely we've got to do something at the same time in order to make sure that the people who are still there are
Yeah,
working in a much better way. So if we are going to be removing people, then we have to think about how we train or support the people that are still there in order to be able to work in a different way, because otherwise other people can't, because on the other side of it, people aren't going to just be able to have a capacity to do more and more, because there's every likelihood they'll vote with their feet. I mean, I wouldn't want to stay within a business that is suddenly going to give me double the workload but exactly the same conditions as previously. And I would wager that given everything that we have been through recently, we're seeing people are much more capable and want to vote with their feet a lot more. Then I would argue that they probably would be up for doing that.
yeah. So when you then say, to raise the quality of work or to raise the quality of what you do, to change the ways of working, what are sort of the top one, two things
Yeah.
that when you come in to say to people, and yeah, let's start with that, and there's
Mm.
a follow up on that one. So what sort of how does that usually look like?
Well, I suppose if you want to raise the quality of working, then you've either got to you've either got to be very clear on what your expectations are on what you want that quality to be. Then you've got to work out where you are now. Then you've got to work out how you're going to fill that gap in terms of what that training is to make sure that people are capable of doing it. But then you've also got to give people the time and the space to be able to do that as well. Because the problem is that in many instances people are completely distracted by the urgent versus actually being focused on the important. So how are you going to enable people to do that if all of your time is focused on the urgent?
So that's a really good point, because I think I've seen this plenty of times into nearly any project I ever worked in, where, and that wasn't just, and that includes pre-COVID, where, when you talk about change and transformation, which is a lot of what I do, you go in and most businesses
Mm,
obviously are already running the way they do, potentially to capacity, which would be good.
mm,
But then you basically have, okay, so how do we change this? We have everything running. Everyone's pretty much spending all of their time doing exactly that. How do you step back, take a break,
mm,
and do the new stuff while you're
yeah,
running the backlog of the old
yeah,
stuff? So that's always been a challenge. So
yeah.
how do you go about that? Where do you start? Who has to convince whom? Who's got the leverage to say, hey, you guys over there, you're gonna step back now. You're gonna focus a bit more on that before you go back to the old stuff or the stuff that's still on in your pipeline, anyways. How do you normally go about that, and where do you start?
Okay, so I think that, to be really clear, where our role within that would be to make sure that the people are capable of doing it. So we don't get involved in transformation work. My role is to make sure that people, by the way, Marcus, I don't know if you know, your Wi-Fi is really poor. You keep cutting out.
Oh, I'm
I
sorry.
don't know, like
Okay.
I don't think it's mine. It
No,
keeps cutting
it's
out. I'm
recording
not
fine. I can
able
hear you
to see.
clearly. So sorry that mine's
Can
cutting
you?
out.
You keep
Yeah,
going. You you keep stopping. And also, just so you know, so we don't get involved in the transformation work. So just so you know that we everything that we do is about looking after the people rather than it necessarily being about getting involved in organizational change.
so then, but when you introduce different ways of working, that's to what extent? So you're saying that's not part of operational change or organizational change, but it
So
is,
we
right?
wouldn't get involved necessarily in the way that, yeah, so we wouldn't get involved in how the a team was working.
Hmm.
Our way of coming into it would be that we would look after the individuals within it. So our role would be to come in and make sure that the people were at their best. So we'd be taking care of their mindsets and their behaviors rather than coming in and looking at process.
Oh, okay. So, and when we look
So
at that,
so where
sorry,
my So my business is so just to be super clear, my business is all around mental health support. It's all around well-being and making sure that people's energy is right. It's all around personal and professional development to make sure that they come from a place of safety internally and being much more conscious of what they're putting out rather than looking at the processes within organizations.
I see.
And then of
And
course how leadership work and how conscious they are.
mhm. And what role in that setup do managers play? Because there's been for many years, one of the main reasons for people to often leave companies are managers. That's
Mm,
stated by a lot of people.
yeah,
So managerial training is very important on average in for a lot of different things.
crucial.
And there's
Yeah,
other people who say, look, even managers have been piled up more and more tasks, have more complex role descriptions now, and maybe need to shift certain aspects.
yeah,
How do managers play into that?
yeah.
If you talk about behavior and safety and all of that
Yeah.
for people.
So I course. So I think that first and foremost, I think that a business needs to be very clear up front on how the job design of their managers, whether or not that support, where they want that focus to be. Because if the job design of a manager is much more focused on productivity and product and profitability, then how are they going to have the capacity to be people managers alongside that? If I've got an 80% commitment to profitability and sales, and 20% to my people, then I've got to be really clear on actually how I'm going to deliver that. So that's the first part of it. The second part of it, though, I think in answer to that, is that I think we all realize that middle managers absolutely are the face of your company, right? And they are the connectors within your company. And for me, in a world where we have greater disengagement than we've ever faced previously within organizations, huge issues around communication and huge issues within relationships, actually your middle managers have touch points both down and up and have a real opportunity to answer it. They're also, of course, facing more complex problems than they've ever faced in terms of the individual challenges that are coming to them from their people. So whilst they are the opportunity, I believe it's also very clear that they don't have enough training. We did some research recently where we asked managers, whether or not they felt prepared for what was coming their way, and only 1 in 4 of them had received even any basic training.
Mm.
On top of that, they all said that they were receiving more complex challenges from their teams. And more often than not, I believe it was around 70% of employees are saying that they just didn't trust their managers. So there's a lot of problems. On top of that, a lot of leaders are saying that they believe that managers are the answers to these challenges and their people issues, such as attrition and retention. But the problem is that they just then don't actually feel that they've got the right training for it. So we all know that they're the answer, but they haven't necessarily either got the right setup in terms of their job design,
Right.
or them being supported to be able to do it in terms of their training, or indeed in terms of their own support as well. Because in this day and age, what's expected of these managers? Are they meant to be therapists?
Yeah.
What is okay and what isn't? What is the remit of an organization in taking care of its people? That's for me is a big
So
question.
in terms of then the role of managers and if that is supposed to become part of their job description or not, I've seen in larger
Mhm,
companies
mhm,
sometimes you have specific, people roles that take care of that in a more horizontal
mhm.
way. Um,
Yeah.
how do you see that then? Sort of, is there a size of organization where these different things kick in, or is there a general model that you've seen that sort of works in that sense where you say, look,
So
this works sort of best in terms of taking care of that or adding that capability to the business?
yeah. So again, I mean, I think that a lot of this comes back to how one determines success within that business, and actually whatever the size of your business, creating an open, safe space where people can talk will do nothing but benefit your business in terms of its trajectory, its productivity, and ultimately how your people are feeling every single day. So I don't think that that's down to a size. I think that's down to just doing the right thing, right? For you as an individual, you as a leader, or overall as your business. And, in terms of how one would want to feel every single day. But in terms then of what an expectation should be, I think that there's something in obviously setting out what those behaviors are that we all sign up to, because we all want to have a better day. I think it's all about us actually saying, if I am committing to my own well-being and that of the team and that of the organization, what benefit is it going to be? Because with all of this stuff, Marcus, more often than not, what we actually forget is to set actually the what's in it for me, for any of us, because that's going to be my reason why I'm going to do this. So, I think that's the really clear thing. Whatever the size of the business, let's get really clear on why we're going to do it, how we're all going to benefit from it, how, a lot of it is simply human skills. And then if we want to, if we can afford it as a business, we then start going into some of the training that's going to support that. Because, more often than not, people desperately want to help and want to support others, but they just don't know how. And they're very scared of doing the wrong thing. So that's where our training can come in to support people, just to give them that reassurance and confidence.
Yeah, great. So I'm going to pick up on being scared of doing the wrong thing because one of the elements in sort of a safe environment that should, in theory, be happening, and a lot of companies love to talk about it, don't have to walk about it like that, is
Mm,
the whole fail and fail fast,
mm,
right? Which
mm.
in our
Yeah,
complex world is becoming more and more a necessity to be able to, in small parts, just to fail 100 times to get to the one that actually brings you
yeah,
forward. And it seems to be, in my
yeah.
experience at least, a tricky one to implement. But I'm sure you've come across that, and
Yeah.
I'd like to ask you, how do you come across that in terms of enabling people or helping people to understand how to create that environment where you can do that and feel
Yeah.
safe enough to actually do that?
Yeah.
Because, in my experience, in the end, it's a nice line to say, oh, we're going to fail fast. But when you look at it and the reality of it, even when you move just a deadline by about 2 weeks, everyone's going to freak out. And that's not even failing. That's just a slight delay, right? Um,
Yeah.
how far have you come across that and sort of helped people to understand that and maybe enable that a bit more?
Yeah, so I think that the first thing I would say is that, again, as a business, you have to agree a success metric, right? You have to all agree up front. Are we either going to be a completely rigid, fixed company who just wants to get really fast at doing the same process over and over again? Or are we the kind of company that does want to be genuinely innovative and does want to fail fast and does want to learn and does want to grow and does want to be creative and blah, 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 blah? Yes, we do. Okay, well, alongside that, then there comes a different set of parameters. So one has to, in the first instance, agree to each of those and what it is that then those expectations are around it. But then, the big thing for me is then about setting the behaviours that are and the expect. So we know where we're going. What is it that we need to do to be able to get there, and setting out the behaviors and the mindset and the thinking that's enabling us to get there. And that is going to come from the leaders themselves so that they can create that safe environment. But then on the other side of it, obviously, if we have this genuinely psychologically safe environment where people can fail and that's okay, then enabling people to feel courageous within that so that they can fail and it's not the end of the world. And what I really talk a lot about when I come to this is a couple of things. It's firstly, I try and encourage people to think about skills, not new skills, but ways of thinking and ways of behaving that they used to do when that they've unlearnt, i.e., they've attached emotion and issue to getting things right or wrong. And actually, just playing and being curious is something that's desperately innate in all of us. So that's okay. The other part of it as well is just remembering that actually every situation in the world is entirely neutral. So if we can come back to that, it's only our thinking and our emotional attachment that makes it positive or negative, or our expectation or our fear. So actually, if we can get people back to everything, every step that they go through is neutral and it is okay, then they can overcome it much more quickly and see it as just a stage in the journey. So I think that, I hope in answer to that question, that it's about setting the scene, having deep agreement up front from all parties, and having leadership role model that behavior, but then creating the environment and then making sure that making sure that the soil is fertile as well as having the seeds to put within it.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think it's so important to look at so many things these days in operations or organizations about the whole context, not just single silos of functionalities. So we
Hmm.
always have more questions than we have time. So I'm slightly getting to the last question. And essentially, so what I wanted
Okay.
to ask here and tap into is, as a C-level person, how do I start? How do I actually start detecting what's wrong? Because again, in a daily, business as usual
Mm.
task environment, I just get my reports, I look at this, I look at that, and I think there's often what I've seen, and sometimes it's called a bit of an air sandwich in between how knowledge travels and what actually the C-level can actually see of what's going on the ground is often very limited due
Yeah.
to time restraints,
Yeah.
attention restraints, or sometimes just how a company is set up. Um, what should C-level look out for in order to look at and go, look, I think the area that you are supporting, that's sort of, I think the environment for that is existing here. What are sort of some of the markers, or what do you tell people to look out for in that sense to know that
Mm.
this needs an uplift?
Yeah. In terms of looking at, in terms of supporting their people, or
Yes.
yeah. So I guess that, I mean, really, um, I suppose it depends how quickly you want to know those answers, right? Because one's business can work very well or well, um, until it really doesn't. So, I think that really it's going to, I'm thinking about this and as I speak. So your business can still be productive. I think, well, sorry, let me go back a bit. The first point I'd like to make is how much you measure, because one, your view as C-suite, as you quite rightly put out, can be totally removed from the rest of the business. And you might not even have that much check on productivity on a monthly basis, or performance on a monthly basis, until at the end of the year your turnover's really massively down, for example. And then so it's so far along before you can actually do something about it. Excuse me. But then in addition to that, a much quicker way, you might be able to see red flags in terms of performance metrics by different performance metrics
Mm.
by team. But if you want something that's a lot quicker, or attrition levels, for example, or retention, so your kind of tangible business metrics. But if you do want something that's a lot quicker, then the obvious answer has got to be communication. The obvious answer has got to be the red flags that you hear from your team, but you're only going to get those if you've got open dialogue with that team and you've got people capable of telling you. So, I personally, we as a business, if I can give you an example, we as a business, we're a relatively small business. There's only 10 of us. But, even with a small number like that, there's a lot of stuff I don't know about. Now, we've been in the very fortunate position that every year we've grown, but still, in particular last year, we doubled in number of our people. So it's much harder
Wow.
for me to be able to keep on top of things. So we ran an audit, and that audit was enabling us to be able to pick up on stuff that was going on, that we could then go and look at how we created new solutions to them. Not that they were problems, but they were things that we could make even better. So I suppose I've been slightly long-winded in that. It really depends, again, in what your metrics are. You can have very good, tangible business metrics, but things tickling along that maybe aren't working as well as they could be. And that might be fine for you as a business. You might be okay with that as a leader. But
Mm.
personally, as a leader, for my business, as you'd expect, stuff like this is massively important to me, because I understand the importance of people and getting them to their best, because I know I can get people at 5, 6, 7 working okay, or they can be at a 10, and I want to get to the 10. So, I think it really is, as a leader, how involved you want to get into that and what is okay for you.
Yeah, it sounds like it. And no, it's great. It wasn't long one. I think it's always good to have an actual practical example. And I think, hearing from your own business and that you practice what you preach is probably the best answer you can give me here. Because I think, it's one of those things where,
Yeah,
unfortunately, some companies do a lot of more like wallpapering over these kind of things. So I think there's a lot to learn about what metrics you're using.
yeah,
If you're looking also more about qualitative
yeah.
aspects,
And
quantitative aspects, and those kind of things.
but I think also, to be honest, Marcus, I think that would, for me, would be really demonstrative of what what you want to be known for, what you
Mm.
stand for as a business, what your business behaviors are. You know, like, I want Push to be a great business. It was interesting. I was talking to a friend of mine the other day, and we were talking about, new trends in people stuff, or things that CEOs should be thinking about. And one of them is thinking about the internal customer. And
Yeah.
you obviously have your external customers, but actually the most important customers that you have are your people, right? Because, everything that you talk about externally, you've really genuinely got to live and breathe. And if I talk about wanting to go into organizations and helping their people thrive and be 10 out of 10s, then I've got to do that myself as well. And I want to be known for the kind of place where people can communicate, and can be really open about what's genuinely going on for them to make their jobs the best that they can possibly be. And, transferring that over now to another business, I think that we often get asked, what is the most important thing that, what's the one thing that we should do as a business? Communication is the most crucial thing. Imagine if you had your people who could be, honest with themselves, honest with each other internally, and then be able to communicate well outside of the business as well, to get briefs, to get the right briefs, to get the right to then create the right things, and then moreover be very conscious of the impact that they make and the impact that the world has on them. Communication really is at the heart of everything. So that for me would be the one thing that I would be promoting any C-suite executive doing.
Absolutely. And it's interesting because, I mean, yeah, for me, I've said for a couple of years, change and transformation, communication is probably 50% of that success above everything else. So it's definitely,
Yeah,
definitely quite a
of
big point to
course.
make. And also interesting, you're saying sort of as having the internal client. I think there's more and more talk about the employee experience and some companies making investment in that be better. Anything from onboarding all the way to how someone feels all through the employee life cycle. I think it's early days in a lot of companies,
Yeah,
but it's great to see that grow. And so you seem to be quite sitting at the center of
yeah.
that element. So I'm sure you're going to have
Listen, I think
more and more business on that one.
I think we we've never really had more I can't even say it, democracy within businesses.
Mm,
It used to be a much more hierarchical rule, and all of a sudden, everyone's got a lot more control. COVID opened Pandora's box, and it's very hard to put that lid back on. And people are much more happy to talk about stuff that's going on and how they're feeling about things, and employee rights have really gone up, etc. So yeah, I think it's a it to be for me, I think at the moment, I think that those human skills of understanding how to communicate well, when we talk about flexible working, for example, and how do we make that work? Well, actually, this isn't a process problem or a how many days in the week problem. It's about having the right human skills to make flexible working work, and something that through no fault of their own, many people don't have because they've never
mm,
worked in that way. Even outside of work, we have it's brand new skills to be able to set relationships when you're not always together, or
yeah,
communicate well, or set boundaries, or whatever those things are. So it's a different world. So we need to be prepared for that.
it's very, very true. And I hope that, if anything comes out of the whole COVID or downturn, all the changes we have been through the last 2, 3 years, as a silver lining is that we're actually finally focusing a bit less on technology and more on people. I think that would be a great outcome. So let's hope for that, and
Do you
it's
think
going to
they
be an
will?
interesting.
I don't know. I mean, I don't know. I think it's really interesting, and something that obviously we chatted about earlier when you were talking about talent or automation. I think that there's still a desire to like, and when I think about some of the kind of apps and the tech in
Yeah,
this looking after human world, a lot of the time it's like, oh, let's just get rid of it, let's just push it over to one side, rather than, for me, this stuff is about genuinely creating, again, coming back to creating, getting people talking more. And I do wonder if we focus on that, or if we look at if we can just push it over to one side and communication can go over there. And, we have different means of communicating, but not really talking.
yeah, that's true. I think there's a lot to learn. I think there's a lot to change. I mean, I've been looking at this for years and saying, look, the world is more complex, or the complexity that organizations have to deal with has increased. And I think there's a big potential here. The
Mm.
problem is that we're still running on a lot of old models and old structures, governance hierarchies, and all of that don't help us at all.
Yeah.
Because we're not robots,
Yeah.
and we shouldn't treat each other like that. But
No.
unfortunately, somehow someone put that too much in business books for some bizarre reason. I have no idea why, but here we are. So let's go and see if change that. Kate, thank you
Yeah.
so much for all your insights and all your time,
You're
and it
so
was great
welcome.
talking to you.
And you, thank you for your time.
You've been listening to The Wicked Podcast with co-host Marcus Kirsch and me, Troy Norcross.
Please subscribe on Podomatic, iTunes, or Spotify. You can find all relevant links in the show notes. Please tell us your thoughts in the comment section and let us know about any books for future episodes.
You can also get in touch with us directly on Twitter on @WickedandBeyond or @Troy_Norcross. Also, learn more about the Wicked Company book and the Wicked Company project at wickedcompany.com.